Hello everyone and thank you for joining. My name is Mavi and I lead the M365 Compliance Customer Acceleration Team, what we call in short as CAT. My team helps customers deploy, understand, and learn about all our M365 compliance portfolio. Today, we're kicking off a new series that we're calling scenario-based demos, and we hope that this series will help you, our customers, understand and quickly adopt our M365 products. My ask, if you have any questions, feedback, or comment, please feel free to add them in the comment section right below this video. We will make sure to check every single comment and address them. Now, without further ado, I want to turn over to my awesome team to kick off that amazing series. Thank you so much. I hope you'll find this series enjoyable and beneficial. Have a great day.
G'day everyone, it's Andrew McMurray here. Everyone calls me Macca and I'm a program manager on the Microsoft 365 Compliance Customer Acceleration Team, or CAT team for short. Welcome once again to the scenario-based demos. We hope you get really good value out of these video series, and let's get started. The purpose of the scenario-based demos initiative is to demonstrate how Microsoft Information Protection and Microsoft Information Governance can be utilized to provide end-to-end information protection and governance, enforce privacy, and ensure compliance with regulatory requirements. The SBD is based on a fictitious scenario which we made up that represents the types of information protection and governance challenges that the majority of organizations sometimes have to deal with when approaching the topic. We aim to help you with tips on how to start the IP&G journey, which is a common ask we see in the field. We recognise the challenges that most customers are facing, so you can look at this as a high-level guidance to jumpstart your IP&G journey. Demonstrate how we can implement MIP and MIG solution components in a scripted walkthrough demo to respond to a specific list of requirements. This is different from just demonstrating how the component would function in an isolated demo. The intention here is to bring them all together in a flowing scenario where there would be dependencies and integration between those components to achieve the best possible IP&G solution. And to raise awareness of the MIP-MIG capabilities, and another way or channel to get us more connected with the public audience, indeed yourself, where you will have an opportunity to share feedback, suggest features, and influence our products moving forward. The whole series will be made up, but very close to real life customer requirements. This is the best way to demonstrate how MIP and MIG can fit into the bigger picture. Each video will be short, 15 to 20 minutes, where there'll be less talking and slides and more demo and technical implementation. At the beginning of each video, there'll be a single slide summarizing what was done in the previous session, so a recap, before starting on the new topic to ensure that it's all connected and flowing nicely. So what is it not? A design or a high detailed or high level or an architecture, not that. A recommendation from Microsoft, not that. Recommended practices that suits everyone. You're still obligated to provide your own analysis and due diligence, so please ensure that you're still taking those activities into account. So now we've set the scene and the rules, let's get started.
Hello, and welcome again to the Scenario-Based Demo, or SBD series. My name is Brendan Lee, and I work with the Microsoft 365 Compliance Customer Acceleration Team, or CAT team for short. Today, I'm going to outline from a high level the fictitious company we're going to be using for this Scenario-Based Demo series. So we're a medical research institution specialized in conducting research on prominent diseases and are currently focused on developing a research study on COVID-19. We're based in 2 geographic locations, Australia and the United States. Now, with the recent increase of cyber attacks worldwide, we need to develop an IP&G strategy to be able to enhance our information security posture. So let's take a look at the IT environment and work norms for our scenario. We've just recently migrated to the cloud on Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Azure. All of our users' identities are hybrid identities, and all of our user mailboxes have been migrated to Exchange Online, as well as the personal user drives to OneDrive for Business. We're also very heavily using Microsoft Teams for collaboration. Now, we maintain a hybrid IT environment where some components are still hosted on premises, such as domain controllers, Exchange and SharePoint servers, as well as network file shares. We're performing medical research studies on citizens who have been diagnosed with a disease where we compensate participants financially to encourage participation after going through an interview process to validate eligibility. We have mainly 4 departments: research, audit and legal, marketing, and then finance. Our employees need to access company data from home using either an organization-provided laptop or using their personal computers or mobile devices. And then finally, we collaborate with 2 other external medical institutions, which require sharing information and research results frequently.
Hello everyone, and welcome again to our SBD series. My name is Walid Al-Morsi, and I work with the Microsoft Information Protection Customer Adoption team. As we just mentioned, through the SBD series, we'll be working towards addressing a list of customer requirements. To simplify the subject before we start, we have broken down the requirements into the standard CIA triad pillars, which are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Just to ensure whatever requirement we need, it will relate back to a real challenge or principle. But first, let's refresh our understanding of the CIA triad. Confidentiality is about preserving the access control and disclosure restrictions on information, guaranteeing that no one will be breaking the rules of personal privacy and proprietary information. Integrity is about avoiding the unauthorized information modification or destruction and ensuring the non-repudiation and information authenticity. When we start talking about availability, is ensuring the information must be available to be accessed and used all the time. So that means a reliable access. So we have selected a few requirements to show you today that represent the CIA triad, and you can tell by the area code that we put there, whether it's C, I, or A. However, all the requirements will be addressed as we progress through the SBD series in the future episodes. Let's very quickly go over the selected ones and see if they make sense to you. The first requirement here is to assist the customer with developing an information protection and governance strategy, including classification scheme. This is typically the first hurdle when starting the information protection and governance journey, as we can see in the field and as we are going to discuss in a couple of slides. So it makes perfect sense that this will be our first requirement. The second requirement to highlight here is at the point in which the restricted information is no longer needed for its primary or retention purposes, it must be destroyed, making it unusable and unrecoverable. As you can see here, we put it under confidentiality and integrity areas. From the context, we understand this is a data retention requirement or data deletion requirement, which could be mandated by a regulatory body, such as like PCI DSS. It's based on the field that your organization operates within. Therefore, we must ensure that we comply with it. Moving to the next section, the selected requirement in this slide is about only authorized users are granted access to PII and restricted information. This is obviously a top priority for a lot of customers we work with. There are many reasons for this requirement specifically to be asked all the time. And again, we will know later through this session why this is so important. Moving to the next section, the selected requirement here is about security alerting. So basically, security alerting should be received by systems in a timely manner, and they should contain evidence-based information to allow for appropriate investigation by nominated parties. It's very important here to call out it's not only alerts to be received and to be available when needed, which falls under the availability pillar, but also it is important to call out the need to ensure that no one has access to delete or remove those alerts or logs. which means that they must not be altered or modified to guarantee their integrity for investigation purposes. The last requirement that we have chosen for you today is a list of employee IDs that should never be shared outside of HR department. Now, this is not a very common requirement where a customer needs to protect specific information, exact values. This information is only relevant to their organization and it doesn't exist in any other organization. Something like employee ID values, which is very unlikely to exist in other organizations. Keep in mind that these values change all the time as employees join and leave the organization. So we need to ensure there is no time gap between when the value changes and the protection control takes effect. And just to keep it interesting, it would be great if we have an automated way to do this. So with that, we finished the requirements part. Hopefully it makes sense to you. Let's move on to the next section. That takes us to the data classification part. So here we're going to talk about the challenges, risks, and recommendations when it comes to data classification. First, let's start with a data classification overview. Sensitive data presents significant risk to any organization if it's stolen, accidentally shared, or exposed through a breach. Risk factors include reputational damage, financial impact, and the loss of competitive advantage. Therefore, protecting the information your business manages is a top priority for you. So, why is it challenging to start the information protection governance journey? And if you recall, we mentioned that in the requirements part. Well, you may find it difficult to know if your current efforts and protection mechanisms are truly effective given the volume of information you manage. In addition to the volume problem, the content ranges in its importance from a very highly sensitive or impactful information to a very trivial sort of information. Or it can be just under the purview of various regulatory compliance requirements. So knowing what to prioritize and where to apply controls can be very, very challenging. So from that, it leads us to the data classification. What is data classification? So data classification describes the process of identifying, categorizing, and protecting content according to its sensitivity or impact level. In other words, or simpler words, data classification is a means of protecting data from unauthorized disclosure, alteration, destruction, based on how sensitive or impactful it is. That takes us to the data classification framework. So let's start by defining the data classification framework. So data classification framework, or as we call it DCF, is an enterprise-wide policy that is typically comprised of 3 to 5 classification levels, each of which usually include 3 elements: a name, description, and a real-world example. Another important component of the data classification framework is the controls associated with each level. It's important to note that data classification levels are, by themselves, are simply labels, or we call them tags, that indicate the value or sensitivity of the content. In order to actually protect this content, data classification frameworks define the controls that should be in place for each of your data classification levels. So, what are the recommended practice when it comes to DCF or writing a DCF? The first thing that you have to know or convince yourself that you cannot go from a 0 to 100 in day one. So we recommend the crawl, walk, run approach. Prioritizing feature critical to your organization, complete the first step, ensure it's successful, and then move to the next phase. It's okay to start small with just a few classification levels and expand later as needed. The second recommendation that you need to know that you are not writing the to only cybersecurity professionals. Data classification frameworks are meant to be for a broad audience, including your average staff member, your legal and compliance team, and your IT team. This means that it's vital to write clear, easy to understand definitions for your data classification levels. Number 3, for data classification frameworks to be successful, they must be implemented. So you have to be realistic. Ensure that requirements are clearly spelled out, anticipating and addressing any ambiguity that might arise during implementation. For example, if you have a control around PII, ensure to spell out exactly what that means, such as social security number, passport number, driver license number. You have to call it out very clearly. Now, the last really important recommendation when it comes to DCF is getting the right people involved. Data classification frameworks are typically owned by cybersecurity team, but they have legal, compliance, privacy, and change management implications. So you have to ensure to include privacy and legal stakeholders, such as your chief privacy officer. If your organization has a compliance division, information governance professionals, or records management team, they will have a valuable addition or thought to add as well. As your framework is rolled out to the business, your communication department also has a key role to play from a messaging and adoption perspective. There is also a data classification handling guidelines, which will help you and help your users with a specific guidance on how to handle each level of data appropriately. These guidance help end users to correctly apply rules in practice. For instance, when sharing documents or sending emails or collaborating across different platforms and organizations, end user training and communication is crucial to success. Next, let's have a look on the information governance side. With that, I will hand it over to my colleague Brendan to take us through that.
Thanks, Waleed. Okay, let's discuss data or information governance. So what is information governance? Information governance is essentially a framework that ensures processes exist to manage data lifecycle. We want to keep data for as long as it's valuable, whether that's based on regulation or company policy, then make sure we mitigate potential risk by defensively disposing of that data properly once it no longer has any business value. Now, without information governance, we take a huge risk, exposing our organization to potential cyber attack and further litigation. In today's world, data hoarding, which is the excessive acquisition and reluctance to delete electronic material that's no longer deemed valuable, is a huge threat. Imagine having no data governance policy, resulting in petabytes of sensitive data, including social security numbers, salary information, and medical records. Now, what happens if a hack occurs? With a data governance policy, the extent of the data exfiltration can be managed by permanently deleting data that's too old to be useful to the business. On the other hand, we also need to make sure that we can keep certain types of data for as long as it's valuable for legal, regulatory, and other reasons. We need to make sure that during litigation, we can hand over all that is required, but not more than is required. So where do we start with information governance? Well, first, it's important to understand what kind of data is out there. Typically, the data landscape is made up of three main categories. We have general information, which is information created and processed by users in a variety of formats and media types. This general data can be subject to legal holds if relevant to active or pending litigation. Then we have personal information, which is information that may contain personal data, which could be subject to regional data protection laws and regulation. We need to be very careful in how we handle this data and may even need to have special rules based on the end user's region. Then finally, we have business records, which may provide evidence of business decisions, activities, or transactions, and must be retained to meet other legal, regulatory, and business obligations. So how can we get started with information governance? In order to be successful with information governance, we have to be sure to follow a series of very important steps. First, and arguably most important, is to obtain executive sponsorship and support to drive an organization-wide information governance program. Senior leadership should not only understand, but also champion information governance from the top down. Next, we want to make sure we develop, identify, and understand accountability. Who's going to ensure we use appropriate policies for the various unstructured data that lives within our organizational boundaries throughout various regions of the world? It's a huge undertaking, which usually warrants an entire department worth of resources with a chief information governance officer at the top. Then, just as with data classification, we need to be very cautious in not jumping off the deep end. Start slow, the walk phase, as Microsoft puts it. It's important to use this phase to understand and collect all regulations that affect our industry and regions. We can also define here what organizational policies we want to have in place, such as ensuring data is no longer kept past its lifetime of usefulness to the business. Now, the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center actually offers many different mechanisms that we can use to make sure that all of our data is appropriately governed. We can use retention policies as a sort of default policy, which can apply retention, then deletion actions to entire locations, such as Exchange mailboxes, SharePoint and OneDrive sites, or even Teams chat messages. This is great for applying a single basic blanket policy organization-wide. Of course, there's a lot of data that may have different requirements, such as requiring to be kept for longer than the default retention policy applies. We can publish a set of labels which can be applied to individual content as needed. We can even choose to auto-apply labels based on certain types of information that may indicate a different level of value from standard everyday data, such as medical records. Of course, there's another class of data that we need to also be prepared to govern: records. Records are essentially the institutional memories of a business. For the very same reason you wouldn't want someone changing your personal memories, records need to be immutable and thus handled differently from other types of data. The first step to using records is to first identify the systems of records. A defined system of record is an informational storage and retrieval system that can serve as an authoritative source of truth. This can, for example, be Exchange, as long as we allow those business memories to be retrieved from Exchange, and we can confirm that the memories remain intact and unchanged. We can then use retention labels published to our locations identified as systems of records, allowing users to mark items as records, thus locking them from modification. Finally, we can use disposition review to ensure information and records are no longer needed from a business perspective before permanent deletion.
Welcome back. Thank you for watching so far, and I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to watch our next videos in this great scenario-based demo video series that we prepared just for you. Also, make sure to check out our one-stop shop resource page that we prepared just for you that contains all our resources from the MIP CXE team. That's at aka.ms/MIPC/OSS. Thank you, and see you on our next videos.